So next sourcing strategy is to cooperate with the associations. For example, there's 𝗁𝗂𝘁 and 𝗁𝗂𝘁 are two of the largest apparel associations. They have 1,000 members each. Everybody, my name is Chris, and today we're going to talk about sourcing strategies in Vietnam. I highly recommend the book, and one of the key takeaways from the book is the importance of having a mission, having clear goals, and staying focused. And my assumption today is that we all share a mission and goals and focus, and that is manufacturing overseas. And specifically, staying focused on manufacturing in China because China is amazing. There are many things that China can do in the changing world that we live in, and the economies are changing, labor costs are changing. It's always prudent to look elsewhere and search and learn about other sourcing manufacturing destinations. And one of the first ones that usually comes to mind is Vietnam, which is where I live and is my expertise. So today I would like to share with you some information about Vietnam. So first, let's have a look at the geography of Vietnam. Is basically split into the north, the center, and the south. In the north, you have Hanoi, and then in the south, you have Ho Chi Minh City, and in the center, you have Da Nang, which are the three major cities in Vietnam, and each one has a port, which is important. So just to the right of the coast, where the red meets the orange, is Hải Phòng, which is one of the second largest port city in Vietnam. And then in the south, we have two deep sea ports. And in the center, in Da Nang, we have a medium-sized port, let's say. And one thing to keep in mind is that there's only direct sailings, for example, from Vietnam to America, for example, only like 3 or 4 times a week, whereas in China, they've got direct sailings every day. So when you choose your sourcing strategy, always keep in mind the shipping options. And a lot of the boats, they go from like Hải Phòng up to Hong Kong or to Shanghai, and then they go out to the rest of the world. Or they'll go from Ho Chi Minh City down to Singapore and then out. So the shipping times tend to be longer. The boats in China are like the biggest and the best, and they're just simply faster. So you got to add on another like 5 days if you're going to be taking boats out of Vietnam to, say, Long Beach. In terms of culture, the north is more Asian, whereas the south is more Western. So when you typically working with people in the south, they're more laid back, they're more open-minded, they're into brainstorming, they're happy to do contracts. Whereas when you go to the north, they're not as comfortable with foreigners, let's say, and they'll try to avoid doing contracts. It's different, you know, it's kind of like Boston. If you're from America, it's like Boston versus Miami. The center, they're like a mix. They have their own personalities and culture traits. The next thing is cost of living. So the cost of living in the north is lower than the cost of living, for example, in Ho Chi Minh City, and therefore the labor costs in the north are lower. Not by a lot, but there is a difference. Talking about the cities, in the past, like Hanoi, there was a lot of manufacturing inside of Hanoi and very close to the center of town. And the same in Ho Chi Minh. A lot of the manufacturing was inside the city limits, but the government over the last 5 years has been asking the factories to close down and move outside. So now there's a trend happening where the factories are leaving the big cities and going to the countryside. And another motivation for that is in the countryside is lower cost of living and therefore lower labor cost. For example, in the green, there is Thanh Hóa, Nghệ An, and Hà Tĩnh, which are 3 provinces which I personally believe are the future of Vietnam. The land is cheap, there's a lot of workers, that would be happy to work for $300-400 a month and learn a new trade. Whereas in like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, the labor cost is like $600 a month. So in Ho Chi Minh City, the factories are either moving into the Mekong Delta or they're moving up into the Dak Lak area in the blue and the turquoise that you see. So next sourcing strategy is to cooperate with the associations. For example, there's 𝗁𝗂𝘁 and 𝗁𝗂𝘁𝗂𝗿𝗶𝘀 are two of the largest apparel associations. They have 1,000 members each. And this is the team from 𝗁𝗂𝘁. And what's important is to notice this book that she's holding. They sell it for $50, and it's got hundreds of factories listed with their contact information and what they specialize in, and it's a very good resource. The associations are very good at helping like buyers with large orders, like 5,000 pieces per style and up. But if you're a small business, a startup, and you want to do hundreds or even less than 5,000, they're not as helpful. And then 𝗁𝗂𝗂𝗁 is a leather association. So if you're doing belts or wallets, leather jackets, you can contact 𝗁𝗂𝗂𝗁, and they have a list of leather factories, and their whole mission is to help connect you with those leather factories. And then 𝗁𝗂𝗳𝗃𝗂𝗁 is a spinning association. So in Vietnam, I'm not sure how many, but there's at least dozens, if not hundreds of, I would say less than 100 spinners. And that's beneficial if you want to take advantage of the free trade agreements. And if your order has to be yarn forward, then if you go to 𝗁𝗂𝗳𝗃𝗂𝗁, they'll introduce you to the spinners, and you can quickly start working together with the spinners to figure out what is possible in terms of having the yarn spun in Vietnam to meet the free trade rules of origin requirements. So the associations are a great resource for sourcing. Let's look at another sourcing strategy. You can use B2B online matching websites like 𝗪𝗶𝗲𝘁𝗂𝗃 and globalsources.com and Yellow Pages in Vietnam. The website is 𝗪𝗀𝗛𝑉𝑒𝑡nam.com. Alibaba, of course, everyone knows, they're just now starting to recruit factories to post their factories on their website. So you can find Vietnamese factories on Alibaba. Global Sources has had a team in Vietnam, I think, for over 10 years, and they're very strong, and they have a lot of Vietnamese websites on their website. The Global Sources team in Vietnam can also help you connect with factories. YellowPages.com is a very local website, and it's free for the factories. And there's a lot of like smaller factories listed on the Yellow Pages Vietnam, and they have an English and a Vietnamese version. I've used it a lot, and I highly recommend you take a look at it if you're trying to find some of the small to medium-sized factories in Vietnam. Next sourcing strategy would be using artificial intelligence. Well, AI just came onto the scene a year ago in November. One of the websites which is really interesting for searching online is perplexity.ai. And if you go on there for free, you just ask the question, give me a list of 20 t-shirt factories in Vietnam, and it will. And it'll also give you the sources of the websites where it got the information, which is awesome. So you can dig deeper and try to get more information. And then if you're a PC user, if you're a Microsoft user and you're using the Microsoft Edge browser and you use the Bing search engine and you've signed up for their AI-assisted search, you can also just ask the Bing AI-assisted chatbot for a list of shoe factories, a list of backpack factories, and it does a good job of giving you what's available on the internet. All right, let's move on to another sourcing strategy, which is the trade shows. Right now in Vietnam, the VTG trade show is happening. My staff were there yesterday, and they said it was kind of slow. It's sponsored by the Taiwanese, and it's been in existence for, I think, more than 10 years. It's a great show. It's very similar to the Saigon Tech Show in that there's a lot of fabric suppliers, trim suppliers, accessory suppliers, and machinery suppliers, but very few sewing companies, which is where the Global Sources trade show comes in. They had their first Vietnam apparel and home goods trade show this year. I was happy to see more than 90% of the exhibitors at the Global Sources Trade Show were actually like sewing factories. So if you're starting a factory or you're looking for fabric, then the VTG or the Saigon Tech Show is very valuable. But if you're looking for sewing factories, then you want to go to the Global Sources Trade Show. VTG and Saigon Techs happen twice a year. VTG is in Ho Chi Minh City twice a year. I think Saigon Techs is one time it's in Hanoi and one time it's in Saigon. And right now the Global Sources Trade Show, well, they've only had their first one. I'm not sure if they're going to do it once a year or twice a year, but we'll see. All right, let's move on to the next sourcing strategy, which is just relationship building, traditional getting to know people and asking for introductions and spending time with the factories, building that bond and just getting to know them well. What I'm going to do is introduce you to some of the people within my network. For example, there's Maxime. He's from Ukraine. He moved to Vietnam, learned Vietnamese in Hanoi, worked for a clothing factory in Hanoi, and then moved to Saigon and started up his own sourcing company. And he's an expert in jeans. He's a good friend of mine, and I could introduce you to him. Another good friend of mine is Sunny Lau. He's from Singapore. He's worked all over Southeast Asia, has 20 years of experience producing for brands like Tommy Hilfiger, and he's an expert in sublimation. He's worked for two of the largest sublimation printing companies, Riga and Transtech, that are based in Ho Chi Minh City, and he now has his own SaigonPrinter.com business. I could introduce you to him. He's amazing. 𝗪𝗂𝗁, I worked for Frank for 2 years. Amazing guy. He started in India with his father doing flat knit sweaters. And then they moved to Vietnam 25 years ago. And Frank transitioned into quality control. And he does a la carte sourcing services. So if you need someone who knows how to litigate or mitigate problem solvings, when there's problems with the factories, there's a dispute, Frank is very good at coming in and helping the buyer and the factory find amicable solution to move forward. So I strongly recommend 𝗪𝗂𝗁. This is Edgar Martinez. He's another good friend of mine, one of the first industry experts that I met when I moved to Vietnam 14 years ago. And he has sold over 100 12 and 16 station screen printing machines to factories all over Vietnam. He knows everybody in the apparel manufacturing space. And then there's Hom Nguyen, who didn't have a LinkedIn profile, but he works for Walmart, and his mission is to help people produce wool products, starting from spinning through knitting or dyeing and sewing. And he knows everybody in Vietnam that's doing wool. Another one is Rick Tang. He works for Huge Bamboo, which is a Taiwanese company. They produce sportswear for Nike and other large brands. They knit, dye, print, and sew. And he's very good at making Lululemon fabric. I get that question all the time. People, I want to produce a t-shirt using Lululemon fabric. What do I do? Talk to Rick. Okay, and last one is Daniel Vu. He works for a Vietnamese weaving factory, and he worked for Coats, which is the thread, I think the #1 thread company in the world, and he worked for them as their technical sales manager for 7 years before moving to a Vietnamese woven fabric mill. If you know me, I can introduce you to them, and for those who've been around the industry for a long time, that's really one of the most effective sourcing strategies anywhere you go. My last point is my advice when you come to Vietnam is to take on a fabric first strategy. And the reason is because that's your #1 challenge. Something like 60% of the garments that are made in Vietnam are using fabric from Korea, Taiwan, China, Pakistan, India. Vietnam has just come of age in the last 5 years, building up spinning capacity, knitting, weaving, dyeing. We don't come close to the demand for fabric in Vietnam. Especially if you need to qualify for free trade agreements, your #1 priority should be meeting with the different fabric mills like Ya Luen, Formosa, Tiong Liong, Hoa Lam, and many others. These are fabric mills that can sit down with you, talk about the fibers that you need, the yarns that you need, the knitting and weaving structures that you need, the finishings that you need, and then they will let you know their MOQs are and their production lead times. One thing to keep in mind about the fabric mills in Vietnam is that most of them have been booked 6 months to a year by the majors, by the Adidas and the Lululemons. There's only like maybe 15% spare capacity in each one of these mills. Most likely the first price you get for the fabric will be 10 to 20% higher than the fabric price in China, just because of the supply and demand dynamics. Again, my advice is focus your time and energy on researching what is possible in Vietnam with respect to fabric. Because once you solve the fabric problem, finding stitching factories in Vietnam, like CMT factories, is very easy. The fabric mills will introduce you, or you can just go online or go to the associations and you just go to the stitching mills and you say, I want to do business on FOB with nominated fabric supplier terms. And then you introduce them to the fabric mills. You say, we've already developed the fabric. This is their price. This is their lead time. This is their MOQ. Here's the contact person. Either use them or source the fabric somewhere else and let's compare price. And then the sewing factory will work on FOB terms and be responsible for everything. Thank you very much. My name is Chris Walker. I'm a Vietnam sourcing expert. I've lived in Vietnam for 14 years. I speak Vietnamese, and my specialty is apparel, backpacks, hats. The services that I offer are introductions by email, or I can take you to factories. So I can take you to 3 to 5 factories in a day. I provide the car, the driver, and I myself I go along. And then you have a chance to meet the factories very quickly, work with them directly, and then my service is done and you go from there. My personal mission is to connect 100 buyers with 100 factories every year. You can find out more about me or contact me at vietnamfactories.com. And I'd like to close by saying, remember that thoughts are things, and where there's a will, there's a way. And I welcome you to Vietnam. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for watching to the end. Would you like to produce your product in Vietnam? My team and I offer consulting, factory introductions, factory tours, and production from A to Z. In short, we are scouts for hire. Contact us today at vietnamfactorytours.com. Welcome to Vietnam.